My name is Arthur Wells. I am 63 years old, and for 35 of those years, I was a fish and wildlife officer for the state of Washington. I have spent more nights under the stars than most people have spent in their own beds. I've tracked cougars, tranquilized bears, and faced down angry moose. I know the woods. I know the sounds, the smells, the subtle shifts in the wind that tell you when something is not right. I am not a man given to flights of fancy or superstition. What I am about to tell you is the truth, exactly as I remember it. It is the reason I no longer go into the forest. It is the reason I now live in a third-floor apartment in a city I despise, where the only growls I hear are from garbage trucks. After I retired, I used my pension to buy a small parcel of land deep in the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest. It was remote, the kind of place you have to want to get to. The last 5 miles were an old, rutted-out logging road that my truck barely tolerated. The cabin itself was simple. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and a deep well with a hand pump. It was my sanctuary, a place to finally be still after a lifetime of motion. The silence out there was profound, a living thing made of the whisper of pine needles and the distant call of a hawk. That was the normal state of things. That was before. It was late October, the air crisp with the promise of an early snow. My old partner, Cal, was coming up for a long weekend. We'd planned a deer hunt, more as an excuse to sit around a fire and drink whiskey than anything else. He was bringing his son-in-law, Brian, and a friend of Brian's named Corey. I hadn't met the 2 younger men before, but Cal vouched for them. He said Corey was an ex-Marine, steady and quiet. Brian, he'd warned with a chuckle, was a city boy, full of talk but good-hearted. They arrived just after noon on a Friday, their oversized 4x4 churning up gravel as it pulled to a stop. Cal got out first, looking the same as ever, a bit more gray at the temples, but with the same solid, capable presence. He gave me a hug that nearly cracked a rib. Brian was next, all bright-colored Gore-Tex and brand-new boots, a wide, easy grin on his face. He shook my hand with too much energy. Corey unfolded himself from the back seat last. He was lean, with a stillness about him that was unusual for a man his age. He nodded once, his eyes scanning the tree line, a habit I recognized. The afternoon was spent settling in, unpacking gear, and sighting in rifles. Brian was a loud, boisterous presence, making jokes about Bigfoot and boasting about the 1,000-yard shots he could make at the range. Corey, by contrast, said little. He moved with an efficient economy, checking his equipment with a practiced focus. Cal and I just watched them, sharing a look that said everything. Youth. We'd had it once. Now we had patience. We showed them the best spots to set up, the game trails, the places where the deer came down to the creek for water at dusk. The woods felt normal, welcoming. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. It was perfect. That first night, we sat around the fire pit outside, the flames spitting sparks into an ocean of stars. Brian was telling a long, rambling story about a disastrous camping trip from his college days. Cal was nursing a whiskey, and Corey was methodically cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time. I was just soaking it in, the camaraderie, the cool night air, the familiar comfort of the wilderness. It was exactly the retirement I had imagined. And then we heard it. It started low, a vibration more than a sound, felt in the chest cavity before it registered in the ears. It wasn't the howl of a wolf or the grunt of a bear. It was deeper, more resonant. It rose in pitch to a prolonged, guttural roar that echoed off the surrounding mountainsides. The sound was a predatory hunger, a raw and ancient rage that cut through the peaceful night like a shard of glass. Every hair on my body stood on end. My years of experience offered no frame of reference. Instantly, the forest went dead silent. The chirping of the crickets, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, everything just stopped. It was the most unnatural silence I have ever experienced. It was the silence of a world holding its breath. Brian's story had died in his throat. His face, illuminated by the firelight, was pale. "What in the hell was that?" he whispered, his jokester persona gone. Cal slowly lowered his drink, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the fire. "I've never heard anything like that," he said, his voice low and steady. "Not a moose, not a bull." Corey had already put his rifle back together. He stood up, not abruptly, but with a smooth, controlled motion. He scanned the perimeter of our small circle of light. "It was big," he said, "and it was a long way off. Sound carries in these valleys." I tried to find a rational explanation. It was my job, my nature. "Could be a distorted sound," I offered, not believing it myself. "An echo from industrial work down in the valley, maybe blasting, bouncing off the mountains in a weird way." Nobody looked convinced. The silence pressed in on us, heavy and menacing. The fire seemed to shrink, our small island of light and warmth suddenly feeling fragile and exposed. The woods no longer felt welcoming, they felt watchful. We sat there for a long time, listening to the nothingness. Eventually, Cal spoke. "All right," he said, his voice firm, trying to reclaim normalcy. "Let's call it a night. Early start tomorrow. Arthur, you got locks on those shutters?" I did. I'd installed them myself, mostly to keep bears out if they got curious. That night, for the first time since building the cabin, I was glad they were there. We went inside, the heavy wooden door thudding shut behind us, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. We bolted it, and I walked through the small cabin, making sure every window was latched and every shutter was barred. The mood had shifted completely. The easygoing hunting trip had evaporated, replaced by a primal, unspoken tension. We were four armed, experienced men, and we were spooked by a sound. It felt foolish, but the feeling was undeniable. That night, my sleep was shallow and filled with dreams of running through endless, dark woods. The next morning, the world seemed determined to prove our fears were unfounded. The sun rose, casting a golden light through the pines. Birds were singing. The tension of the previous night felt like a dream. Brian was back to his old self, making jokes about us being scared of a forest ghost. We ate a quick breakfast, the conversation deliberately light. We were hunters. We were going hunting. That was the plan. We decided to split into two pairs. Cal and Brian would take the high ridge to the east, while Corey and I would follow the creek bed north. We agreed to meet back at the cabin by midday. As Corey and I moved through the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt through my nervous system. Corey was the same. He moved with a heightened awareness, his rifle held at a low ready, his head constantly swiveling. We'd been walking for about an hour when the smell hit us. It was the coppery, metallic scent of blood, thick and heavy in the cool morning air. We slowed our pace, moving cautiously toward the source. We found it in a small clearing maybe 50 yards from the creek. It was a doe, or what was left of one. I've seen hundreds of animal kills in my career. I've seen what cougars do, what bears do, what wolves do. This was none of those. The deer had been torn apart with a savage, explosive force. Its rib cage was splayed open like a book, the organs gone. But it wasn't the work of a scavenger. The spine was snapped in two places, a feat that would require immense power. One of its hind legs had been ripped clean from the socket. Corey knelt, his face grim. "Look at the tracks," he said, I came closer. The ground around the carcass was churned up, but in the softer soil near the edge of the clearing, there were several clear impressions. They were huge, bigger than any bear track I'd ever seen. They were also wrong. They were elongated, almost like a massive human footprint, but the toes were too long and ended in deep claw marks. And there was another disturbing detail. They were bipedal. The tracks led into the clearing and then away, a clear stride pattern of something that walked on two legs. "No bear walks like this," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The gait is all wrong." "This wasn't a bear," Corey said, his eyes still on the tracks. He pointed his rifle barrel at the trees. "Whatever did this, it broke this sapling on its way out." He was pointing to a young fir tree, about 4 inches in diameter. It was snapped clean in half, about 7 feet off the ground. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. A bipedal creature, tall enough to snap a tree at that height, strong enough to tear a deer apart like it was made of paper. The sound from last night echoed in my memory. We stood there in silence for a full minute, the scale of what we were looking at slowly dawning on us. "We need to go back," Corey said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Now. We get Cal and Brian, and we get out of here." I didn't argue. We turned and began to walk back toward the cabin, moving much faster than we had on the way out. We abandoned any pretense of hunting. We were no longer the predators in these woods. The walk back was the longest mile of my life. The forest seemed to have changed. The shadows were deeper, the trees closer together. Every sound was a potential threat. We didn't speak. We just moved, our rifles ready, our backs to each other as much as possible. When the cabin finally came into view, a wave of relief washed over me. Cal and Brian were already there, sitting on the porch. Their hunt had been uneventful. They hadn't seen or heard anything unusual. Ryan was complaining about the lack of game. "Pack your gear," Corey said as we approached, his voice tight. "We're leaving." Brian scoffed. "What's the matter? Did you see a scary squirrel?" Cal looked from Corey's grim face to mine. He knew me well enough to see that something was seriously wrong. "What did you find, Arthur?" I described the kill site, the tracks, the broken tree. As I spoke, Brian's smirk slowly faded. Cal listened intently, his expression growing more and more serious. When I was done, he stood up. "All right," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "You heard him. Let's pack it up. We'll be on the road in 20 minutes." We moved with a purpose, throwing our gear into bags. The atmosphere inside the cabin was thick with tension. We were trying to be logical, to be efficient, but an undercurrent of panic was starting to build. We were 4 men with high-powered rifles, and we were running. It felt wrong, but my instincts, honed over decades in the wilderness, were screaming at me to get out. That's when we heard the first sound, a heavy thump against the back wall of the cabin. It sounded like someone had thrown a large rock against the logs. We all froze. Brian, who was nearest the back window, let out a nervous laugh. "Probably just a branch falling." "That was no branch," Corey said, moving silently toward the front door to peer through the peephole. "It was deliberate." Then came another sound, from the front this time. A long, slow scraping noise, like claws being dragged down the heavy oak of the door. My blood ran cold. It was here. It had followed us. We were trapped. The sun was beginning to set, the light outside turning a soft, dusky orange. The shadows under the trees were growing long and dark. Whatever was out there was waiting for the night. "Everyone stay away from the windows," Cal ordered, his voice low. He was already checking the load in his rifle. We did the same. The click of 4 bolts sliding home, was the only sound in the room. We spent the next hour in near silence as the last of the daylight faded. The cabin was plunged into darkness, save for the weak beam of a battery-powered lantern we placed in the center of the floor. The sounds from outside became more frequent. Heavy footsteps circling the cabin, a low, guttural sniffing at the base of the walls. Then, the most terrifying sound of all, the metallic rattle of the doorknob on the back door, turning slowly back and forth. It was testing us. It was intelligent. It knew we were inside. It knew we were trapped. This was not a mindless beast. This was a hunter, and it was playing with its prey. I crept to one of the side windows, the one that looked out over the creek. The shutters were barred, but there was a small crack between the slats. I put my eye to it, my heart pounding against my ribs. For a moment, I saw nothing but the deepening gloom of twilight. Then, a shape detached itself from the shadows of the trees. It was huge, taller than a man, broader than any bear. It stood on two long, jointed legs that bent backward like a canine's. Its arms were disproportionately long, ending in what looked like large, clawed hands. It was covered in thick, dark fur that seemed to absorb the fading light. It turned its head, and for a horrifying second, I saw its profile against the slightly paler sky. It had a long, lupine snout, pointed ears, and the unmistakable silhouette of a wolf's head, but it was perched atop a pair of massive, man-like shoulders. I stumbled back from the window, a gasp escaping my lips. My mind recoiled from what I had seen. It was impossible. A creature from a nightmare, a folk tale made flesh and blood, and standing just yards from our door. "Arthur, what did you see?" Cal's voice was sharp. It's out there," I stammered, trying to find the words. "It's big, walks on two legs." Before I could say more, a tremendous crash echoed through the cabin. The window on the far wall, the one Brian had been standing near, exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. Something had been thrown against it with incredible force. It was a section of a log, thick as my thigh, and it now lay on the floor amidst the debris. Brian screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror. He had been standing too close, and a shard of flying wood had opened a deep gash on his forearm. But that wasn't why he was screaming. He was screaming at the empty space where the window had been. "Light!" Corey yelled, and Cal fumbled with a powerful flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating the gaping hole. For a split second, a face filled the frame. It was a nightmare visage of matted black fur, burning yellow eyes, and a long maw filled with dagger-like teeth. A low growl rumbled from its chest, a sound that vibrated through the very floorboards of the cabin. It was the same sound from the night before, but now it was here, right here. Then it was gone, vanishing back into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared. But the image was burned into my mind. The raw, malevolent intelligence in those eyes. The attack had begun. Chaos erupted. Brian was clutching his arm, whimpering in a state of shock. Cal was trying to calm him down while also trying to find something to board up the broken window. Corey and I took up positions, our rifles pointed at the two doors and the new, gaping hole in the wall. "There's more than one," Corey said, his voice eerily calm. "I heard movement on the other side of the cabin right after the log hit." He was right. A moment later, a heavy, rhythmic pounding began on the front door. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the frantic scrabbling of an animal. It was measured, deliberate. It was trying to break the door down. At the same time, a splintering, tearing sound came from the back of the cabin. "They're trying to get in both doors at once," Cal yelled over the noise, trying to shove a heavy table in front of the broken window. They're coordinating. I moved to the back door, peering through the peephole. I could see nothing but darkness, but I could hear the splintering of wood as claws, thick as knives, tore at the frame. The entire door was shuddering with each impact. The pounding on the front door stopped. For a moment, there was an eerie silence, broken only by Brian's ragged breathing and the tearing sound from the back. "Where did it go?" I whispered. A loud scraping sound from directly above us answered my question. It was on the roof. My blood turned to ice. It had climbed onto the roof. We heard its heavy footsteps moving across the shingles. Then a new sound, a violent, wrenching, metallic shriek. "The stovepipe!" Cal shouted. "It's trying to tear off the stovepipe!" Corey didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired a single shot straight up through the ceiling. The roar of the .30-06 inside the small cabin was deafening. It was followed by an enraged canine roar from the roof and the sound of heavy scrambling. A shower of dust and splinters rained down on us. The creature on the roof moved off, but the one at the back door redoubled its efforts. A loud crack echoed through the room as one of the hinges gave way. The door sagged inward, held only by the deadbolt and the top hinge. "It's coming through!" I yelled, leveling my rifle at the buckling door. "Brian, get down!" Cal screamed, shoving his son-in-law to the floor behind the overturned sofa. Corey moved to my side, his shotgun ready. "On your signal, Arthur." The door burst inward with a final explosive crash of splintering wood. A hulking shape filled the doorway, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. It was massive, easily 7.5 feet tall, its frame so wide it had to stoop to get through the opening. Its yellow eyes scanned the darkened room, fixing on us. A low growl rumbled in its chest. The smell that rolled off it was overpowering, a foul mix of wet fur, rotting meat, and damp earth. "Now!" I screamed, and we both opened fire. The cabin was filled with a strobing series of muzzle flashes and the deafening roar of our guns. I put 2 rounds from my hunting rifle directly into the creature's center mass. I saw the impacts, saw the fur fly. It staggered back a step, letting out a roar of pain and fury, but it did not fall. Corey's shotgun boomed, the buckshot tearing into its leg. It howled, a sound of pure agony, but it only seemed to enrage it further. It lunged forward, moving with a speed that was impossible for something so large. It swiped a long, clawed hand, and Corey's shotgun went flying, its stock shattered. The creature's momentum carried it past him, and it crashed into the main room. From the broken window, another one began to climb through. It was slightly smaller, leaner, but just as menacing. We were caught in a crossfire. Cal fired his rifle from his position near the fireplace, the bullet striking the second creature in the shoulder. It shrieked and fell back out of the window, but we knew it would be back. The first one, the larger one, recovered its balance. It ignored the wounds in its chest and leg as if they were mosquito bites. It fixed its glowing eyes on me. I tried to cycle another round, but my hands were shaking. The bolt felt slick with sweat. It took 2 long, loping steps toward me. I was going to die. I could see the intelligence in its eyes, the cold, calculating hatred. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct. It was a monster, and it was enjoying this. Suddenly, Corey was there. He had drawn a large combat knife from his belt, and with a wordless battle cry, he charged the creature. It was the bravest and most foolish thing I have ever seen. He drove the knife deep into the creature's thigh. The monster roared and backhanded him. It was not a slap. It was a blow of incredible force. Corey was lifted off his feet and thrown across the room. He hit the stone fireplace with a sickening crack and slid to the floor in a heap, unmoving. The creature pulled the knife from its leg and threw it aside with a grunt of annoyance. It turned its attention back to me. Just as it was about to lunge, Cal fired again, this time aiming for its head. The bullet must have grazed it, because it jerked its head back with a yelp and spun around to face this new threat. "Arthur, run!" Cal shouted, chambering another round. "Get out the back!" The creature charged him. Cal got one more shot off before the beast was on him. I saw Cal, a man I had known and trusted for 40 years, a man who had saved my life more than once, disappear under the bulk of the monster. I heard him scream, a sound that was abruptly cut off. My body finally responded. Survival instinct, pure and absolute, took over. While the creature was occupied with Cal, I scrambled toward the back door. Brian was still on the floor, paralyzed with fear, his eyes wide with horror. "Come on!" I yelled, grabbing his uninjured arm. "We have to go." He was like a dead weight. He wouldn't move, just stared at the unfolding horror by the fireplace. At that moment, the second creature came scrambling back through the broken window. It landed lightly on its feet and immediately spotted us. There was no more time. I had to make a choice, a terrible, selfish choice that will haunt me for the rest of my days. I let go of Brian's arm. I left him there. I burst out of the broken doorway and into the cold night air. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I heard Brian scream my name, a sound that was cut short by a wet, tearing noise. I just ran. I ran for the truck, my lungs burning, my legs pumping on pure adrenaline. The clearing was bathed in pale moonlight. I could see the truck, my only hope of escape, parked 50 yards away. The woods around me were alive with movement. I could hear the second creature crashing through the underbrush, coming after me. It was fast, faster than me. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, my fingers numb and clumsy. I reached the driver's side door and wrenched it open, throwing myself inside. My hands shook so violently, I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I could hear the thing getting closer, its heavy, panting breaths, its claws tearing at the dirt. The engine turned over once, twice, and then caught with a roar. I slammed the truck into gear just as a massive furred shape appeared at my window. The face from my nightmares was there, inches from mine. Its lips curled back in a snarl. It smashed its hand against the driver's side window. The safety glass spiderwebbed, but held for a second. I stomped on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning in the loose gravel. The creature roared in frustration and smashed the window again. This time it shattered, showering me with glass. Claws raked across my arm and shoulder, tearing through my jacket and into my flesh. The pain was searing, white hot. But the truck was moving. I wrenched the wheel, and the vehicle fishtailed wildly before finding purchase. I floored it, heading for the logging road. In the rearview mirror, I saw the two creatures standing in the clearing, illuminated by my tail lights. They were watching me go. They were not pursuing. It was as if they had gotten what they wanted. They had destroyed my friends, my sanctuary, my world. And they had let one of us go, to spread the tale, to live with the memory. I drove like a madman down that logging road, bouncing over ruts and rocks, the branches of trees scraping and screeching against the sides of the truck. I didn't slow down. I didn't dare. I was bleeding, in shock, and crying, great, heaving sobs of grief and terror. I drove until the logging road met the paved county road, and I didn't stop there. I kept going until I saw the blessed, beautiful sight of another car's headlights approaching in the distance. Only then did I pull over to the side of the road, the engine still running, and completely fall apart. The first people to find me were a young couple on their way back from a late movie. They saw my wrecked truck, the shattered window, me covered in blood. They called 911. I remember trying to tell them, trying to explain, but the words wouldn't come out right. I was babbling about monsters, about claws and yellow eyes. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear. The sheriff's deputies arrived, and then the paramedics. They patched up the deep gashes on my arm and shoulder, asking me questions I couldn't properly answer. Who did this? Was it a car accident? Was I on drugs? I tried to tell them the truth. I told them about the cabin, about Cal, Brian, and Corey. I told them about the creatures. They gave me that look. The one cops give to a hysterical witness, a drunk, a madman. A calm, professionally patient look that doesn't hide the deep skepticism beneath. They sedated me. The last thing I remember is being loaded into an ambulance, the red and blue lights flashing against the dark, silent trees that lined the highway. I woke up in a hospital. A county sheriff named Miller came to take my official statement. I was calmer now, more lucid. I told him everything, from the beginning. I described the sound, the tracks, the carcass. I described the siege on the cabin, the appearance of the creatures, their intelligence, their impossible strength. I told him how my friends died. I left nothing out. He listened patiently, taking notes in a small pad. He never interrupted. When I was finished, my voice hoarse, he closed his notebook. "Mr. Wells," he said, his voice gentle, "you've been through a severe trauma. It's not uncommon for the mind to fill in the blanks when something terrible happens, to create a narrative to make sense of something senseless." "It wasn't a narrative," I said, my voice rising. "It was real. Go to the cabin. You'll see. You'll find the bodies. You'll see the damage. We sent a team up there as soon as we located the property from your registration," he said. "We found them. Your friends. I'm very sorry." He paused, letting the weight of it sink in. "The scene. It's consistent with a bear attack. A very large, very aggressive grizzly." I stared at him in disbelief. "A bear? Did you see the door? Did you see the roof? No bear does that. Did you find the shell casings? We fired dozens of rounds." "We found the casings," he conceded, "and the damage is unusual. But in a panic, in the dark, it's easy to mistake one large, dark shape for another. You and your friends were firing wildly into the dark. You probably wounded the animal, made it even more frenzied. It's a tragic, terrible accident. But it was a bear. It was a neat, clean story. The official story. The one that wouldn't cause a panic. The one that didn't involve impossible monsters that walked like men. My testimony was dismissed as the ramblings of a traumatized old man. The gashes on my arm were officially recorded as injuries sustained from the broken window glass. Case closed. I was released from the hospital a few days later. The funerals were a blur of grief and quiet, pitying looks from relatives. I had to tell Cal's wife what happened. I tried to tell her the truth, but I saw the same disbelief in her eyes that I'd seen in the sheriff's. In the end, I just let her believe the story about the bear. It was easier. It was less insane. About a week after that, as I was packing up my house to sell it, a car pulled into my driveway. It wasn't a patrol car, just a plain sedan. An older man got out. He was tall and weathered, wearing a deputy's uniform that looked like it was a few years away from being retired. He introduced himself as Deputy Clark. He said he was one of the first officers on the scene at my cabin. He didn't come inside. We just stood there in my driveway. "I read your statement," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The official one, and the transcript from your first interview. The one where you were less coherent." I just nodded, expecting another lecture about trauma. Sheriff Miller is a good man, Clark continued, looking out toward the distant mountains. He likes things to make sense. A bear makes sense. He turned his gaze to me. But I've been working these mountains for 40 years. I've seen what bears do, and I've seen things they don't do. The way that stovepipe on your roof was bent. The way the doorframe was splintered out, not pushed in. That wasn't a bear. A small flicker of hope, of validation, ignited in my chest. Then you believe me? He didn't answer directly. He reached into his car and pulled out a thin, worn manila folder. He opened it on the hood of his car. It was full of old missing persons reports, some of them dating back decades, all from the same remote section of the national forest where my cabin was. Hikers who vanished from trails, hunters who never came back to their camps. Every 10 years or so, someone goes missing up there, he said, tapping a photo of a smiling young woman who had disappeared in 1988. Official cause is always lost to the elements or animal attack. But sometimes we find a campsite that's been torn to shreds, or a car left on a logging road with the door ripped off its hinges. We don't put it in the reports. People wouldn't understand. He closed the folder and looked me dead in the eye. His face was grim. My advice to you, Mr. Wells, is to sell your land and move away from these mountains. You got out. Most people don't. Some things are better left alone. Some places are better left to the things that live there. He got back in his car and drove away, leaving me standing there with the terrible, chilling confirmation that I was not crazy. He was the only person who ever believed me, and he was warning me. I sold the cabin and the land for a fraction of what I paid. I didn't care. I just wanted it gone. I moved here to this small apartment in the city, surrounded by concrete and steel and noise. I need the noise. The silence reminds me of that terrible, watchful quiet in the woods. I don't sleep much anymore. When I do, the nightmares come. I see Cal's face in that last moment. I hear Brian screaming my name. I see Corey, so brave, thrown aside like a doll. The guilt is a physical weight that I carry with me every day. I made a choice in that cabin. I chose to live. I ran. And I have to live with that. The scars on my arm have faded, but the ones inside never will. I have 3 different locks on my apartment door. I can't stand to be near dogs, especially large ones. The sight of a forest on television makes my palms sweat. My life as I knew it ended that night. The man who loved the wilderness, who found peace in its solitude, is gone. In his place is this frightened old man, haunted by shadows. I am telling you this for a reason. Not for sympathy, not for belief. I don't expect it. I am telling you this as a warning. The world is not as safe and knowable as you think. There are still dark places on the map, places where ancient things linger, things that are hungry and intelligent and full of hate for the world of man. So if you ever find yourself deep in the woods and the birds suddenly go silent, do not dismiss it. If you hear a sound in the night that your rational mind cannot explain, do not ignore it. Trust that primal fear, that small voice in the back of your head that tells you to turn back, to run. It is the oldest and wisest part of you. It is the voice of all your ancestors who survived the night. Listen to it. Go back to your car, lock your doors, and drive away. Do not hesitate. Do not try to be brave. Just go, because you may not get a second chance. I'm alive because I ran. My friends, my brave friends, are dead. I live now only to honor their memory, to be the one voice left to tell the world what happened in that lonely cabin. to warn you. There are wolves in the woods, and they walk like men.